everyone, and welcome to the Evolve with Emily show YouTube channel. The best way to support the show on this YouTube channel is to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and or share it with a friend. I hope that you guys enjoy this episode, and whichever way you choose to support the show, I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys so much. I hope that today's message and episode brings some bit of positive change to your life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Evolve with Emily show. I am your host, Emily Hayden, and today's guest is somebody who has been labeled a hero in previous years, and this year is being labeled a threat. This guest today, his name is Ivan Didyk. He is from the Soviet Union. So he was actually born in the Soviet Union, came to America in 1992 as a religious persecution immigrant, went to college in Vancouver, loved being a nurse, but due to the COVID vaccine, his career is ending. And he is actually, rather than being disappointed and discouraged by it, he's actually expectant that a greater opportunity is coming, that God is going to bring that into his life. So let's go ahead and welcome Ivan Didyk. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me, Emily. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to interview you today. I first came across your page on Instagram when you posted this post of yourself in all of your PPE, and it says, "Today is October 1st, 2021. As of today, my hospital put me on unpaid administrative leave and has promised to fire me later this month. I've been an ICU nurse for 5+ years, and in the past 20 months, I have worked long, brutal 12-hour shifts in the medical surgical ICU, which we will get into and I do want to talk about with you. And the end of that is saying you gave your heart 100% to your patients and to your hospital. And now after a short time of being a hero, you're actually being labeled a danger, all because you chose not to get the jab. And now here you are standing for medical freedom, not just for yourself, but for everybody else and everyone that comes after you as well. And by choosing medical freedom, you're now losing your opportunity to make a living, your opportunity to put food on your table. So can you explain to me a little bit why you feel so strongly that it's important that we have medical freedom?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think also do with different perspectives in life. So you mentioned that a little bit. I was born in the Soviet Union, and when I came here in 1992, I was born in '86, so I was 6 years old. Um, I didn't really experience any direct persecution. I probably did, but I didn't know it. But I heard a lot of stories from my parents um, of they used to go to church, they used to meet in the forest because it was illegal to meet, and they used to not know which location in the forest they were meeting until the day of, where they would make a last minute decision, and it would be only transferred by word of mouth to where they would meet in church, so the KGB wouldn't come and arrest them. And the KGB would show up to church services and arrest the leaders and fine everybody, basically like a month's wage, which was so expensive that it was unbelievable what communist Soviet Union used to do. And so when we came to America as religious freedom seekers, because America was religious freedom, and then Soviet Union broke up right afterwards too, so it was kind of a interesting timing. We were always brought up with the story of what happened in the Soviet Union and why we should never allow that to happen. My dad went to college and finished like an 8-year degree of a forestry engineering. And then when they found out he was Christian, they took his degree away from him.
No
So
way.
he started to work as a forestry engineer, making really good income in the Soviet Union. There's a lot of forests in the Soviet Union, especially in Ukraine area. And then when they found out he was a Christian, they took his degree away. He became a bus driver, making close to minimum wage.
Wow.
And I remember growing up, my dad used to tell us that if I could go through it all over again, would I go back to college and do the college knowing that I never got to work as my career? And he said every single time, yes, I would do it, because it made me a more rounded person. It made me a better person. It made me appreciate what I have more because of what I went through. And so when we came to America, we kind of were brought up with the importance of personal development, growth, college. And then when I was 13, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And then in the next couple of years, he was put on hospice, and he got a little bit better. And then he ended up passing away when I was 17 in high school. And so the last 6 months of his life, we had a lot of hospice nurses that would come over to our house to take care of him. And really, they took care of the whole family. They took care of all of us.
Mm.
I remember I was crying because I wasn't sure what was going to happen as a teenager in my life. And the hospice nurse sat down with me for 20 minutes of her time and talked to me and
Wow.
answered questions.
Wow. What an
Yeah. And
angel.
so, yeah. And that's when I fell in love with the idea of nursing. I was like, this profession, you can love people
Hmm.
with your job like no other job because you can connect with people on a deep spiritual, emotional, physiological level.
Hmm.
And it's actually encouraged. Even in nursing school, we talked about connecting with people and healing people on a spiritual level, which there's very little careers you could do that in. So
Hmm.
that's why I chose nursing. It's because of my experience with my dad. After he passed away, I was kind of inspired to become that for somebody.
Wow, that is beautiful and makes so much sense why you have so much love and passion for what it is that you do. You know, I've heard you speak about it previously. I believe it was an interview that I saw, maybe an Instagram post where I was just like, man, he loves what he does, like with a passion. You know, it exudes from you. And so hearing your backstory just kind of ties everything all together. So, how long have you been in the ICU unit?
Yeah. So initially, when I graduated from high school, went to college, I became a nurse officially when I turned 25.
Mhm.
And then I worked for a couple of years at a clinic setting. And then I started working in the ICU. So I've actually been, my original post, I said 5+ years because I didn't want to do the math. But I did
Yeah.
the math since, and I've been in the ICU for 7 years.
Okay.
And during that time, I got my CCRN certification and my bachelor's degree as well.
Mhm.
And I did a couple of contract nursing jobs and then a couple of regular nursing jobs. Then I also did flight nursing, and I also did critical care transport nursing,
Wow.
which, yeah, so at the end, I got fired from two jobs, my hospital job and my critical care transport nursing job.
Wow. So I read that post from October 1st. It is now October 14th. Have you officially been fired?
Now, my critical care transport nurse job, I have been fired officially. My last shift was Monday.
Okay.
Um, and the hospital job, they put me on unpaid administrative leave on October 1st,
Mhm.
and I'm told I'm going to officially be fired on October 19th.
Okay. So
So
we're just 5 days away. Wow.
yeah,
And
but
you have a smile
but
on your
I'm not
face.
counting. Oh yeah, no, I'm not counting on that job. I know I'm going to get fired because there's 800 of us from this hospital, and I actually have this coffee thermos that they gave us a year ago
Uh-huh.
that says "Healthcare
Healthcare
Heroes."
heroes. Wow.
Yes. So it's a nice
Wow.
memory for me of how we used to be heroes a year ago.
Wow. Okay.
And now,
So, yeah, so I want to get into that actually. Let's get into 2020 and I want to get into some of the real experiences that you had with patients coming in, your experience with COVID when it first came out, and how, I imagine a lot of us were all fearful because we didn't know what it was yet. So, kind of explain what was going on. What was going on with the patients? How were you treated? How were you treating them? And what kind of moments were you involved in with those patients?
yeah. So since we have time, I want to give a little bit of perspective of kind
Please.
of
Yeah.
my view. So in nursing, I have a lot of very deep held beliefs, spiritual, religious, emotional, with the whole Soviet Union, freedom beliefs. But I know that in nursing, when somebody's going through a hard time, especially the end of their life, they don't need my beliefs. They need my compassion and my love.
Mm.
So my goal in nursing was to treat everybody, no matter what their religion was, no matter what their race was, no matter what their sexual orientation was. I treated them with 100% respect and love because that was my passion. They were a human being in front of me, and my goal was to love them and treat them because in hundreds of cases, I was the last person that held their hand, that prayed with them, that talked to them, that supported them, that the last interaction that they had with any human on this earth before they died.
Wow.
And
What
so
a
I took that
special
responsibility.
position.
Yeah, I just took that responsibility very, very seriously because I realized that, you know, we're eternal beings.
Mhm.
And if I can be the last person to have an interaction on this earth when they go into eternity,
Mhm.
I feel like that's a huge responsibility that not very many people get to have. Um, so that was kind of my perspective.
Mhm.
When I treated patients, uh, there's a lot of ICU nurses that could tell you this, that it's a very challenging job. It's challenging on multiple levels. I think I had a Fitbit at one point where it showed how many steps I would walk, and I'd walk 20 to 30,000 steps a day in 12
Wow.
hours.
Wow.
So physically, it was exhausting. You have to turn patients every 2 hours so they don't get bed sores. You have to lift them up, move them from bed to bed, and some of these patients are weighing, 4, 5, 600 pounds,
Wow.
and we have lifts to help us, but sometimes you can't use lifts, and so it's physically exhausting. I remember coming home and just being physically in pain
Mm-hmm.
because of how much work physically, and then the emotional stress. Um, Countless and countless of times where we had patients that would be in ICU on a ventilator for a month. They eventually get trached, which is the tracheostomy in the neck, where they'd be on a ventilator. And then we would have a meeting with the family in a room with a nurse, a physician, and a chaplain. And we would tell them basically that there's nothing else we can do. And we call them the comfort care meetings. And so we comforted the family and we told them there's nothing else we can do. And we're basically like, this is it, this is the end. And I remember those moments of just connecting with the families of the patients when they're losing their loved one. And I would come home, and I'm a grown man and I am not a fan of crying because I feel like I'm tougher than that. But I had moments where I'd come home and I would just cry.
Yeah.
As a grown man, I would just cry because emotionally it was so draining.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but I did it because of compassion, because of love. And even like, because I used to do construction before this, and I remember there would be moments, and I don't know how graphic you're okay with me getting, but
Yeah. Full send it.
where all right, sounds good. You can edit this part out if you want. Where you're in the ICU and somebody asks you to go help with the cleanup, and you put on all your PPE, you double glove, I've even double gowned before, and you start going into the room, and even with all the PPE, the smell is so horrid that you
Really?
can't come in. So you would walk out of the room. I used to have a little trick. This is for all you ICU nurses out there. This is an amazing trick. You get a mask,
Mm-hmm.
you put toothpaste, and then another mask, and the smell is 100% better. That's a trick for
Wow.
the ICU nurses out here. And then
Yeah.
you would go in the room, so you would hopefully smell the toothpaste instead of what's happening in the room, and there would be rivers of things that most humans should not have to deal with.
Wow.
But as a nurse, you put double gloves on, triple gloves. I've done quadruple gloves before, and you turn on your compassion and you help clean people up and love people in that way. And I remember those moments where my regular brain is telling me, why are you doing this job?
Mm-hmm.
You used to do construction, make good money, and worked with wood. Why are you doing this job? And then my inner self and my spiritual self would say, you're doing this because you're having an impact on people's lives more than what you used to be able to do in construction. And so to me, my spiritual self was louder than my physical self.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stayed in the job. I loved the job. I was passionate about the job.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's kind of the perspective of the nurse. So it was, and then the last thing I want to kind of mention is
Mm-hmm.
I had patients with TB where we didn't know they had TB. And then by the time the test came back, we found out that we were exposed. And so we would have to get TB testing. Um, I had patients with HIV that I gave them an insulin injection and then turning around, I poked my finger with that I had to get tested for HIV.
Wow.
I've had patients with all types of, Hep B, where we're dealing with their body fluids on a daily basis. And every day I would come home and I was exposed to all of these diseases. And I have 3 little kids and a wife. And I would come home and I would have to take my scrubs off in the garage on these days and throw them directly into the washer and then go straight into the shower, knowing that there is still a part of me that could have some contaminant on me that exposes my family. So I lived with my job knowing that I'm putting my family in danger, at least a little bit, with exposed into diseases that I'm with every day that sometimes I don't know are there because we haven't tested for them yet. So the drain on your family, on your emotional health, um, it's deep. It's like you really have to have a passion for it. And the nurses who didn't have a passion and a love towards people and driven with compassion, they didn't survive. They didn't make it because it was too hard. It
Yeah.
wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's who God made me to be.
Mm.
And I was able to exercise that with that career. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience in my 7 years of ICU nursing.
You know, you're the kind of person that we need in that position. And I've spoken to a few nurses now, kind of, post the initial COVID, now in, this next year of it. And I feel like the ones that are left are the ones that are just deeply rooted in it. Their hearts are really there for it. And it really alarms me that a lot of those really good people with the best hearts that are willing to literally suit up and show up and do whatever it takes to love and to care for somebody, that we're now just eliminating them from the process altogether. Who are they going to be replaced with? That's where my mind goes. So while, this COVID is breaking out and you're dealing with all of this stress, what is something that helped you have strength during these times? What is something that gave you strength when, you're exhausted, you've done 30,000 steps, you had to suit up and put toothpaste inside of a mask with another mask, like all these just crazy experiences. You're holding someone's hand for the last breath of their life and you come home. How do you feed your soul? How do you feed yourself in order to give yourself strength to keep going?
Yeah. For me, I mean, the short answer is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
When I lay down in my bed and I close my eyes, I imagine the God the Father, who is ultimate love, being right next to me. Wow. And being with me. And when I meditate on that moment, I get overwhelmed with peace and overwhelmed with just abundance of love. And so all the love that was drained from me throughout the day, physically and emotionally and spiritually, just gets replenished in that moment when I'm laying in bed with my eyes closed, meditating. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is I mean, I grew up Christian, obviously, since I came here from the Soviet Union as a Christian refugee. And I kind of had a point in my life where I kind of rebelled and partied a little bit and kind of walked away from the faith. But even in those moments, I mean, I know this isn't nursing related, but I'll kind of tell the story. I remember coming home. I lived with my mom at the time, and I was drunk. I couldn't stand up. I was so drunk. And I remember putting my foot on the ground next to my bed so that I would be able to close my eyes, because if I didn't have my foot on the ground, I would start spinning so much that I couldn't. I'm sure a lot of people have had that experience.
Been there.
Yeah. And I remember in that moment, I just like closed my eyes and I was like, what am I doing with my life? And I felt like the tangible presence of God next to me.
Wow.
Saying, I still love you.
Wow.
What you do and your actions do not do anything to my love towards you. My love towards you is unconditional. And I remember laying in bed drunk, realizing, wow, God loves me regardless of what I do. Like, that's true unconditional love. Because the problem, well, a lot of us humans, we look at love as conditional. I mean, even in marriages, 99.99% of good marriages, your love is conditional. If your spouse starts cheating on you, you're probably gonna get divorced. That's conditional love. And there is moments, I think, where God is true unconditional love, and we get to experience that love, and we can start giving that love. And so that's what gets me through the days when it was really difficult, is realizing and reconnecting with that unconditional love of God and having him fill you up with peace, because that peace it's unexplainable. Like, it's unexplainable. You're just so overwhelmed that there's no way to explain it but to experience it.
That is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that experience.
Yeah.
And you're the second person this week to share an experience like that, where you were in bed and you felt the tangible presence of God. And I had shared on the last interview that I did that I had a moment very similar to that, where I was alone in my bed and the presence of God like came into my room, and I felt that inexplainable just peace and love and presence and just everything. And so it's really cool hearing other people's stories about that, because I always refer to that moment in my own life as the time when my belief turned into a knowing. I'd always believed, yes. I had grown up believing, I'd grown up having faith, I had connection with a higher power, I felt, but then it turned into a knowing of like, yes, God is real, he is existent, he is here all the time, yes. He loves us, he loves others, and he is like the ultimate source of love. So I love what you're saying here, because you're saying that in order to love your patients and to love everyone around you, you first had to be filled with the ultimate source of love. And it makes sense why you're able to have strength to go through through everything that you guys went through in 2020. So you're a hero. You're labeled as a hero. When does that label start to change? And what did that do to you mentally? That must be so weird to go from people literally calling you hero, praising you for the incredible things that you do, which is deserved, to all of a sudden now labeling you as a danger. How was that experience, and when did that start to happen?
Yeah. So it happened, I would say it's 2020. So I got sick with COVID, and I'll maybe cover this a little bit later in the interview, but in early 2020. And so when I came back to work after being sick, 2020 was a solid hero year. We felt like heroes. There was signs outside the hospital that says heroes work here.
Mm-hmm.
And you felt appreciated for probably the first time in our career.
Wow.
And then beginning of 2021, when the vaccine started coming out, there was a lot of division being sown between people. And this is one of the worst things about COVID, in my opinion, isn't how many people it's killing, but how much division how many souls it's killing. Because it's sowing a lot of division between really good people. All of the nurses that I worked with in the ICU were amazing, unbelievable, loving people. But even going back last week to clean out my locker, there was a few people that would make eye contact with me and just walk away.
Wow.
People that I used to be really close with, that I'd be elbow deep in body waste with in the past and had amazing connections with before. And I don't blame them. They're taught and manipulated into feeling that way. It's not their fault. It's not something that they chose to just not like Ivan because he chose a different path. And the majority of nurses were amazing. Like, people were like hugging me and talking to me, and even a couple of doctors that totally disagree with my decisions, but they were so supportive and saying they're so proud of me for standing up for what I believe. They don't agree with what the hospital did to me. So it was really cool to see the support from 99% of the nurses and doctors that were there.
Yeah, and it makes me happy to hear that it was nurses and doctors that don't agree with your opinion, because I think that that's where we come together and have unity, is just the freedom to have your own opinion and to choose a different route if that's what you would like to do, because that's why we're America. We have the freedom to do these things right now anyways.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I wish Americans understood the freedom that they have and the path that they're allowing us to go on when they start giving up little freedoms. Because the steps from freedom in a free country to dictatorship is just a few steps. It's not that many steps. It's not, you would think socialism or communism is far, far away, but we're only a few steps away. And so when I realized, medical freedom is a big part of that. And so when they started manipulating people and caring so much about your health that they're willing to make you starve for your health, that's when you realize that freedom is being impacted. And it's not about your health anymore, especially when you look at, science, the Israel study of natural immunity being at least seven times better than vaccine immunity. So it's not about your health. It's not about the danger that you put your patients in. That's what they're saying on the surface. But in reality, because science disproves their theory, in reality, we know that it's some sort of conspiracy. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I hate conspiracy theories, but some sort of idea to take away freedoms. And I'm not sure where that's coming from or who's in charge of that, but I can't help to see us heading down that path. And that's when when I finally lost my job, I realized that this is the moment for me to speak up, because if America turns into Soviet Union and I didn't speak up, I'm going to hold part of that responsibility.
Wow.
And so this is my moment to speak up and try to wake people up and to help them realize that God is ultimately the creator of the universe and the creator of the earth. And God has principles of love, and we should support those principles of love and not allow people with different ideals to overtake our country that's amazing and free for all religions. That's the beauty of even when you look at Christianity or the way God operates, he doesn't force people to believe in him. He doesn't force people to serve him. He gives people freedom. He wants people that are free. if we even go back into the Garden of Eden, there was two trees in the garden that are mentioned. There's the tree of life, which I believe is the tree of Jesus and just
Mm-hmm.
intimacy with Jesus eternally,
Mm-hmm.
and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is the path of the law, which is what man chose. But man had a choice. God gave them ultimate freedom from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe God gives everybody ultimate freedom. That
Mm-hmm.
when Christians try to manipulate people into coming to Christianity, that's not God. God doesn't manipulate people.
Mm-hmm.
God gives love, and that love attracts people. People want to come to him when they experience this love. But when Christians try to manipulate people or even hate on people,
Mm-hmm.
like from a Christian perspective, I'm sorry if you felt judged or hated
Mm-hmm.
anybody out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not God. That's humans that misinterpreted God, and I apologize on their behalf because that's not God.
Oh my gosh, go off. I'm just sitting here. I've never heard somebody so eloquently connect all of those pieces, because you're right. The ultimate thing that God gives us is that freedom of choice, and we can choose one way or the other. And so I think that that's why we have to protect this freedom of choice in America at all costs. Once we lose that freedom of choice altogether, we're already in that path of socialism, of communism. And I think it's really powerful coming from somebody who was born in the Soviet Union, and parents have direct experience with that. You know, I think there's a lot of people similar to yourself that are speaking out and doing their best to warn Americans. I think it's kind of that concept of you don't know what you have until it's gone. And I really hope that it doesn't take that for people to understand what's going on here. Though I will say I am encouraged, because I do believe that the majority of people are not okay with what's going on, and more people are speaking up. I'm seeing more and more, nurses and emergency personnel and firemen and pilots and flight attendants, everybody now realizing we've got to speak up because this is going too far already. So I do want to circle back to when you mentioned that you had COVID. So take me through that of having COVID, what that means for your immunity, and just kind of give me that story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had COVID in February of 2020. I was actually on paternity leave. My daughter, Ariel, who's adorable, you can see her on Instagram.
Oh.
Um, she's the love of my life. She was born on February 6th. So I went on paternity leave. And about 2 weeks later, I got sick. So my baby was 2 weeks old. And I'm not sure where I got sick, if it was at the hospital before going on paternity leave where I got exposed, or if it was somewhere in public. Um, but I got exposed and I got sick. And for some reason, healthcare workers get more sick than the average person.
Really?
Um, yeah, and I don't know if it has to do with our immune response towards it, because we've been exposed to other viruses in the past, or what it is. But everybody, if you look at actual data, like the immune response is more extreme with people who are healthcare workers, and they end up getting more sick on average.
Wow.
It might be viral load too. I'm not sure exactly what it is. So I got really sick. I remember having a fever of 39. I use Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit.
I'm like sitting here trying to do the math. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Basically, every single night for a week, and coughing, like uncontrollable coughing. And then the second week, and I was always checking my pulse oximeter on my finger since I'm a nurse. I know that if somebody would call me and ask me if they should go to the hospital, I would recommend that if their oxygen saturation is below 92%, I would go to the hospital.
Okay.
But I also know that in the ICU, when we have patients with COPD, we're okay with oxygen's 88 to 92%. And that's just my nursing knowledge. So, if people with COPD can do it, I thought I could do it. So I had oxygen saturations of 88% consistently for 3 days. And I just watched and said, if it dips to 87, I'm gonna go to the hospital. And then it dipped to 87. And I was like, if it dips to 86, I'll go to the hospital.
Oh no, stubborn.
And luckily it stayed at 87. So,
Okay.
so I think for 2 days, I thought that I might die.
Wow.
I genuinely thought that this might be it.
Wow.
My wife tells me that I became really, really kind during that day and during those 2 days. And I thought that, I might go to the hospital and die. And a lot of people, once they go through the progression of getting worse, that it cascades pretty fast. People can do really good for a long time with COVID. And then it can go downhill really fast. So you go to the hospital, you start putting on oxygen, and then you get transferred to the ICU, and then in the ICU, the goal is to keep you off the ventilator, because people who go on the ventilator, a lot of them die. And it's not, and the theory is the ventilator kills you. I've heard this way too many times.
Right.
But the reality is it's not the ventilator that kills you. It's you were so sick in the first place, you have to be put on that ventilator. So it's how sick you were that kills you, not the ventilator. The ventilator slows down your dying process.
Wow.
And sometimes enough to where you can get better and survive. And sometimes not enough. It just doesn't slow it down fast enough and you still die. So going back to my story, I got really, really sick. My oxygen saturations were very low. I was very short of breath, horrible cough, horrible fever, oxygen saturation is 87%. And I just waited it out. I was so weak, so lightheaded, I couldn't walk. Another tip for people who have COVID who are short of breath is if you lay in your belly, your lungs can expand more and work better. It's really, really important for COVID.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know that back then, because this is before we knew that. We found that out later in 2020 in the ICU. We do that to most of our COVID patients now. We make them lay on their belly to allow their lungs to expand more. But eventually I got better. And as I got better, like with any coronavirus, because if you know, coronavirus is a common cold. COVID-19 is a form of coronavirus, but it's coronavirus. So a lot of the principles that apply to regular cold coronavirus apply to COVID. And with regular coronavirus, if you've been sick, you develop antibodies towards that virus. And the virus can obviously mutate over time, and sometimes you can lose immunity. And the way immunity works, and we'll go a little bit into the science of it, is when your body is attacked with a foreign substance, it essentially takes a picture, is how I'm going to call it. It takes copies of the proteins on top of the virus, which is essentially a picture of the virus, and gives it to a bunch of immune cells. So they're called antibodies. And then it also creates that same picture and gives it to other cells called memory T cells. Memory T cells are also immune cells that help build antibodies. And it's really important to acknowledge both those cells, because they're both very important immune cells. So antibodies are basically soldiers that fight the coronavirus, and they have the picture of the coronavirus. So when you have natural antibodies from coronavirus, it has a full picture of coronavirus. So when the coronavirus mutates into, let's say, it changes its nose a little bit, angled, the rest of the face still looks similar. So natural antibodies who've seen the coronavirus will say, hey, that's the coronavirus, let's attack it. The vaccine takes one protein, so one feature of this picture, and makes the antibodies with that picture.
Oh, wow.
So it's not, so let's say the protein that they pick is the eye.
Right.
It takes a picture of the eye of this virus, and it makes antibodies against the eye. So vaccine immunity, when it sees that eye, says that's the coronavirus, let's attack it. Well, if coronavirus changes its face by mutations and the eye looks different, vaccine immunity will no longer work. But natural immunity, because it sees the whole face, even if the eye changes, it can still potentially recognize it.
Wow.
And that's why with the Delta variant, vaccine immunity is not as good as natural immunity, because the variant was just different enough to where some immune responses from people who were vaccinated did not recognize the virus. Whereas natural immunity always recognize the virus, or more likely to recognize the virus. And that's, the studies have proven that scientifically.
Wow.
So I guess
yeah, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah, and then the second part is, because the argument is, well, what happens if your antibodies go away? When your antibodies go away, you have memory T cells. Memory T cells are also immune cells that remember what the picture looked like. Even though the soldiers are gone, the memory is still there. So if you ever get exposed with the virus again, even if your antibodies are gone, your immune response will still be a lot faster than it would be if you've never been exposed. And so for me, because I believe in science, I believe that science is man's way to understand God. Because God created everything in the universe, and he created universal laws like gravity. If you drop this, it's gonna fall. I drop it, it falls. That's a universal law that God created. And so science is basically discovering those laws, proving them in the lab, and putting them on paper. And so it's beautiful to me. And so I believe in science. Because I was sick, I wanted to check for antibodies to see if I had them. So I waited 3 months, because they said that immunity can go away after 2 to 3 months. So I wanted to see if I had immunity. So I waited 3 months. I got checked in May or June of 2020, and I had positive antibodies. And then fast forward a year and a half later, in September this year, when I needed to decide if I was going to get fired or stand up for my beliefs, I wanted to have more data, science data, and I wanted to see if I still had antibodies. Because the word in the street is your antibodies go away after 6 months tops. And so I checked a year and a half later, and I still had antibodies.
Wow.
And I know that different, and this is where, if you see that the interview that we did with Newsmax TV, the CEO of the company, that's their whole goal, is to individually look at people's antibodies and give individual treatments for people's immunity versus just a vaccine for everybody.
Right.
Because that's not how we do science. That's not how we do medicine.
Right. And I think everybody's body is so different and responds so differently that we should be looked at as individuals. Just with any other medication, any other treatment, it's never just a blanket, everything, one size fits all. Thank you for explaining that. I've never heard the antibodies explained. So that was very digestible for even the person that doesn't have a full understanding of knowledge of that. So thank you for explaining that. So going based off of that, I am very logical, which is why when there are certain mandates and rules that are just have no logic to them, it hurts my brain and I don't understand it. So based on the science, the fact that there are multiple studies all over that show that natural immunity is better than vaccine immunity, with the science being the medical field, being doctors and nurses, why is it that they're not following science when it comes to this? Why do you think it is that they are prioritizing vaccine patients, vaccine people versus the people who choose not to get vaxxed? Why aren't they allowing immunity to be how they have like a religious exemption? Why won't they allow immunity to also be, something that people can prove and show with the tests?
Yeah, I think that it's ultimately about control. One of the biggest arguments that I hear and if you guys know Z-Dog, Dr. MD, there's a guy on Instagram that's a doctor. You Google him. He's amazing. He's pro-vaccine, but he's very logical. He talks about this exact same thing. He says that immunity should be counted as a vaccination because it makes sense logically. But what's interesting, he says this stat is 95% of doctors in America are vaccinated. And nurses, only like 60% are vaccinated. And CNAs are like 40% vaccinated. And he was saying that the more education you have, the more likely you are to get vaccinated. And the argument is the more educated you are, the smarter you are to make the best decision and look at the science.
Right.
But in reality, and I've talked to actual doctors who I'm friends with, and they didn't want to get the vaccine, but they have $300,000 to $400,000 worth of debt from medical school. So they are not able to lose their job for what they stand for. So the more debt you have, it's just the golden handcuffs. The more debt you have, which means the more education you have, the more likely you are to find a way to justify your vaccination so you don't have to lose your job.
Wow.
And that's the reality, because I've talked to many, many doctors who got the vaccine because they didn't want to, but they can't afford not to because they can't lose their job. And that's why doctors, in my opinion, are vaccinated at 95%. And the lower the education, the less percentage of people are getting vaccinated, is because the lower the education, the less golden handcuffs you have, and the more logically you can look at data and not be skewed by a debt payment you have to make every single month.
Wow.
And the ability to not be able to pay it without that job.
Talk about the manipulation and coercion.
Yeah.
They know that these people have to provide for themselves and for their families. And I just feel like a lot of them feel that they've been backed into a corner and have been faced with the decision that they have to do it. I was at dinner the other day with friends of friends, and very quickly we dove into all the hot topics. Not sure how that happened, but, it was very interesting to me because they are people that are, very, very pro-vaccine and even pro-mandate as well. And I was very interested because it intrigues me and makes me very curious when people just believe so wholeheartedly differently that I really want to understand. And the kind of, stake that they were standing on was that, doctors and people in the science world are taught to question everything. So they're saying, don't you think that they've questioned everything when it comes to the vaccine? Don't you think that with science, they've done all the questions, and if they're trusting it, then we should trust it. We should trust the experts. And, more than that, I don't feel comfortable with it yet until there's long-term studies and we're out of clinical trials and things like that. That's how I feel personally. But regardless of any of us, how we feel, I still believe that we should all stand for medical freedom. And, one of the arguments was that, and I don't actually know what positions these people held. I gathered that one had gone to medical school and that one of his employees had gotten COVID, didn't have the vaccine, and apparently got very, very sick and had to take paid leave. And so as a business owner, he was very upset that he had to pay for somebody to have COVID. But to me, that line of logic doesn't really make sense when people who get the vaccine are still getting and spreading COVID and can still get very sick with it. So what is, your opinion when it comes to people who have had the vaccine getting kind of a free pass at society when, just like us, they can still spread it and get it?
Yeah. So I think that the logic that they initially said, that the reason why we want you to get the vaccine is so you can protect your patients, is scientifically flawed, and that's proven by science. Because science says that if I have natural immunity, I'm not going to hurt my patients. That's the reality. So we have to look at the manipulation that's happening with the vaccine. And then when it comes to so people who get COVID or get the vaccine can still get COVID and can still spread it. So the fact that me not getting vaccinated with natural immunity, I can still get it and still spread it. Less likely, but I still can. And they can still get it and they can still spread it. So the PPE that we both wear protects the patient from us potentially spreading it. And whether you're vaccinated or not, and when it comes to the vaccine, if you look at the data, again, there is more reactions from the COVID vaccine than all the other vaccines before. So in anything in medicine that we do, we always, and I've been to probably thousands of these meetings where we say, hey, you have a problem with your heart, we need to take you to surgery. Here is the risk of the surgery. The risk is when we're doing the angiogram in your heart, we can potentially rupture an artery. We can rupture a lung. You can have bleeding, you can have infection. Here's all the risks. Here is the benefit. The benefit is if we don't do this, your quality of life is going to go down because your heart won't be able to pump as effectively and you won't be able to walk or move around or live the way you live now. So here is the benefit of the surgery. Here's the risks. What do you want to do? In medicine, we call that informed consent. Informed consent is when we inform you of the risks, we inform you of the benefit, and we allow you with your doctor to decide which route you want to take. For some reason, informed consent has been taken away with COVID. Instead of informed consent, we decided to do informed manipulation. That's what I'm going to call it, because we give you the benefits of it. We deny the risks of it, even though if you work in the ER, and I work in the ER, you see patients coming in all the time with side effects. I mean, I worked in the ER a couple of shifts, and in a couple of shifts, I saw 4 or 5 people with side effects or reactions to the vaccine.
Wow.
Why aren't we talking about those?
Wow.
We need to present the evidence to people. This is the benefit. This is the risk. Please make a decision, an informed decision. If the benefit outweighs the risk, then go for it. Get the vaccine. If the risk outweighs the benefit, then don't get it. And that's why I like the freedom approach. Give people the evidence. People are smart. Give them the evidence, give them the facts, and let them make the decisions. And then based on that decision, they're the ones that deal with the consequences. One other thing I want to kind of mention is, for some reason, doctors are not talking about other data and facts related to COVID. And I kind of talked to them in a couple of my other videos, but I wanted to mention real quick. 82, this is according to the CDC, 82% of people that died from COVID were either overweight or obese. 82%. So a majority of people that died from COVID were overweight or obese. It's been a year and a half. We knew this from the very beginning because that's the people that were dying initially. Why aren't the doctors saying, hey guys, if you're overweight or obese, let's get you on a plan to exercise, to eat healthy, let's get you to lose 20 pounds
Mm-hmm.
and become more active.
Mm-hmm.
Not only are you going to be less likely to die from COVID, it's going to be essentially as effective as the vaccine potentially from looking from a death perspective. But it's also going to increase your quality of life and make you more happy and joyful.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a win-win, but for some reason they don't talk about that. Or like the foods that we eat,
Yeah.
or I did a video on cortisol levels and stress levels. Like high stress activates your immune system when it's not supposed to be activated and lowers it for when you're actually attacked with the virus. So high stress and anxiety and fear actually lowers your immune system. It's science.
Wow.
But yet somebody on TV can peddle fear
Mm-hmm.
day in and day out, and people are receiving that fear, lowering their immune system, increasing their chances of dying from COVID. Why aren't we educating people on fear,
Mm-hmm.
on healthy eating, on exercise,
Mm-hmm.
and reduce the chances of people dying from COVID probably more, or at least as much as the vaccine? Why aren't we
Wow.
pushing that? Because it's effective. It's science.
Wow. And if it really was about health, don't you think that's exactly what they would be doing? Why would we not be doing everything in our power to help people have a better chance if they were to contract and to get it? Imagine if last year they had done a nationwide, challenge where they supported people in getting gym memberships and working out and
Yes.
created this like nationwide movement to get healthier and choose better foods and pour into, nutrition and helping people understand how to make good choices and making food that is healthier more readily available to people that normally maybe
Absolutely.
can't have it. Why are we not supporting, farmers to be able to produce more for those things? So I agree. I think there's a lot that could be done in the name of health, and yet they're putting this, smear campaign saying it's about health when in reality it's not. It's about manipulation and coercion. And like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier, this road does not lead to a good road. And I think it's really
Mm-hmm.
important that we all really recognize that and stand firm. It's unfortunate to hear that the doctors really feel they've been pushed into a corner and had to make that decision for themselves. But I hope that other people who haven't quite crossed that line yet, haven't had to make that decision for themselves yet, I hope they'll be encouraged to connect with other people that are around them that believe the same, because the truth is we have strength in numbers. Imagine if all those doctors were strong enough to stand together and to say, none
Mm-hmm.
of us are doing it. What would have happened then? We can't have hospitals without doctors.
Yeah.
And
Southwest Airlines is a great example of that, because
mm-hmm.
all the pilots got together and said they're not coming into work because of the vaccine mandate. And then 2 days later, the CEO came out and said, we're not firing people who don't get the vaccine. It works. It works. Standing up works. If doctors do the same thing, it would work.
It does. I shared on a recent podcast as well, but I'll share again in case people didn't hear it. There was this, I believe it was a dentist office where they were forcing a mandate, and everybody at the office, and it wasn't 100%, but it was most of the people at the office, got together and said, we respect your decision, but we will find employment elsewhere. And then like a week later, the mandate was reversed and they're all working at work happily. Another RN that I interviewed named Garen, she was being segregated and discriminated against because she actually got a religious exemption, was able to continue at work, but they made her sit outside alone to eat. She wasn't allowed to be around her coworkers. And after her post going viral, a week later, that policy was taken out so that now she's no longer discriminated against at work. So it really does work. Like when you guys get together and you share your voice and you support others that are doing that, it works. So, that's why I have given such a light on my podcast and as part of my business to shed light on people like yourself who are doing the hard thing. You are saying no to the way that you literally provide for yourself and your family and, the light of your life, the love of your life, right? And taking this big, gigantic step in faith, knowing and expecting, like you say, that God will provide for you. And I really do believe
Yes.
that. I really do believe that when you're doing what is right and you're standing true to your convictions, God will come through to you. And he already has. It's just, you got to walk down the path and discover it that day and say, oh, this is what was in store for me.
Yeah. And not just come through and provide.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like every time you stand for your beliefs, and my parents taught this leaving the Soviet Union, when we stood on our beliefs and lost everything we had, my parents essentially sold everything just to have enough money for tickets for our family to fly. So when we came here, we had zero money. We gave up everything. But now, 30 something, 25 something years later, our lives are amazing. So
Wow.
when you stand for what you believe, God not only provides, he upgrades.
Wow.
He upgrades. So if you want an upgrade in your life, you want to be more emotionally, spiritually secure, more mature, more financially successful, stand up for what you believe. Because that's the people that God gives an opportunity to upgrade. It's a law that God put into the universe, and we get to benefit from it by standing for what we believe, and God blesses us for an upgrade. Everything in our life, and I've never been so excited about my future. The next year in my life, I can't wait to see what God has for me, because it's going to be so much better than what I'm leaving behind, because I stand for my beliefs.
Wow, your confidence is just exuding,
Yeah.
and I love it. And I'm really excited to see where this path leads you as well. You had shared a post on your Instagram that I just had to mention because I saw it and I was just like, yes. It says, "I'll be honest, I'm not really good at obeying mandates from a government that also mandated, not too long ago, for African Americans to drink from a separate water fountain or take any medical advice from, for that matter." Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good friend of mine, Oleg, posted that, and I reshared him. If you guys, he is probably the most talented, underused artist that I know. So if you guys go give him a follow and check out his artwork. His artwork blows my mind. It's so amazing, and he doesn't know how good he is.
Wow.
But he actually posted. He also came from the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And so the idea of, if you look back in history, governments have made a lot of mistakes in the past. And why are we assuming that they're not making mistakes right now? And so I think that because they made mistakes in the past, I think 50 years from now, we're going to look back at the vaccine mandate and we're going to realize that was a horrible idea. And I'll give you a quick example. So, trying to figure out how much to share on this one. So I have my job, the critical care transport job. I won't name the company, but I basically transport patients from one ICU to another that are super sick on life support. And they fired me. Well, I can't work after the 15th, and my last shift was last week. And so I transported a patient last week who was an ECMO, which is basically an outside heart and lungs. They pump all your blood out, they oxygenate it, they pull out the CO2, and they put it back in your body with this machine. Wow. And when I picked up the patient from the hospital, there was a bunch of military in the hospital because they fired so many nurses that they didn't have enough nurses. They had to have the military, National Guard, come in to help. Wow. And so I was talking to the nurse that was taking care of this patient, that is an actual nurse that works there, that has the vaccine. And I was like, hey, how is it having the military? Like, is it helpful? Is it, what is it like? And he said, and this is his words, he said that the military nurses and staff that are there have amazing hearts and they're good intentions, but they don't have experience. They don't have knowledge. They don't know how to run an ICU patient. They don't know how to run 3 different pressors on an IV pump, or run an ECMO machine or a ventilator. Wow. So they're there as bodies and they can help turn patients. But in reality, we're overwhelmed, we're way overworked, and we're super short on nurses. So in reality, the mandate to fire everybody who's qualified and who's good at their job and who's certified and has all the certifications, and they're really, really good nurses, firing all those people in my hospital, fired 800 people.
800?
The replacement. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, my hospital system, between like 5 or 6 hospitals.
Wow.
The replacements, even the military that comes in that replaces, it's not going to be the same. So I think 6 months from now, if they don't go back on their mandate, I think when the busy season hits in January and February, which it does every year, I think people will die. Wow. People will die in the ICUs because they're not going to get the care that they need. And so I think when we look back at this 50 years later, we're going to realize those people didn't have to die. This mandate was a huge mistake. I'm already seeing it on a small scale, and I have a lot of friends who are still in the ICU. People are going to die as a result of this mandate if it's not reversed.
Wow. Wow. It's incredible to hear somebody from the inside shed such light on what's going on. Because I've heard a lot of people say it's, and people for the mandate saying it's totally fine. We have the National Guard coming in and they'll just do their job. Right. But like you're saying, like they don't really have the experience needed to deal with the severity of what you guys have had to deal with. And for me, if my loved one was going to be put in the hospital, which God forbid, I hope that doesn't happen, I wouldn't want somebody without COVID experience treating them or helping them, or somebody who didn't know how to run an ICU treating them. The person I would want is the person with the experience, with the know-how, with the training, to help bring them hopefully back to health, because that's the goal. But, from everyone that I've been talking to, they've been echoing a lot of what you're saying, is that when this happens 6 months down the road, that's not going to be a good situation that we're in. And again, as the leadership of this country, I think, is really failing to prioritize health and to prioritize life. They have such a marketing campaign all over the news that it's all about the health, when in reality, they're doing things that is going to be detrimental to the country, detrimental to families, even just not allowing people to provide for themselves and for their families. They're going to force people into really difficult situations. What are people going to do when they're desperate and have no money for food and no money to do anything, right? I think desperation can lead to some really, really troubling times, especially given the fact that, we're talking about the medical industry right now, but think about the police force. This is also happening in the police force, right? And it's like, when that's happening and we don't have people policing and responding to calls, you're going to see an uprise in more, dangerous crimes and murder rates and, all sorts of things. So I really appreciate you coming on here today and sharing more about your story. I'm really inspired by you to always stand firm in what I believe in, and inspired by your parents even. That's absolutely incredible that you have that firsthand knowledge and experience. I think what you're able to offer to all of us viewers and people who don't have that same experience is just a new perspective of what might be down the road if we don't now show up and suit up. So is there anything else that you would like to share on the podcast, or any last message that you'd like to give to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think ultimately, I just want to share with the audience that people who are vaccinated, I love you guys. I don't judge you. I realize that you have to make the decision you made, whether it's because you believe in the vaccine and you made the decision as informed consent, or whether you manipulated it and you have to do it. I love you guys. I appreciate you. I thank you for what you do. We need to bring people together. Like, no matter where we stand, let's bring people together. I don't think the government realizes the side effect of this mandate. And the people running hospitals are too afraid to stand up to them and to educate them on what the side effects are of this mandate. And so I think meanwhile, people are being divided. And so my biggest message to people is let's just love each other. Like, we're all logical human beings, and God created us in the image of himself, and his image is love. So we, at our deep, deep core, are love. And so let's go into the deep core, and let's just show love with each other and just love each other. And if you don't agree on something, that's okay. Have a conversation, have a discussion, have a heated debate. But at the end of the heated debate, hug each other. You can wear masks if you want while you're hugging each other, and hug each other, and realize that you guys are both human beings put on this earth to love people and to help people be better.
Wow, that is beautiful. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you for being on today's show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Emily. I appreciate it.
Of course.
This is honestly an honor to share my story and to hang out with you online.
Yeah.
It's cool to just see one person on a live versus doing national news, because then a lot of more people. It gives me a lot more nerves thinking of how many people are watching me here, even though more people are probably watching. Seeing one person makes it easier to talk.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Well,
so I appreciate you, Emily. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for being on. Well, everybody listening and watching, if you're over on YouTube watching, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If this episode was helpful to you at all, please do us a favor and share it on your Instagram stories, text it to a friend, get the word out however you can. My podcast, I don't believe, is flagged right now, but my social media is very flagged, very censored at the moment. So you guys, we need your help in getting this message out there. And the way that you can help us is simply by just texting it to one friend, sharing it on your stories, or sharing it with somebody who you think might need to hear this message. If you guys would like to get in contact with Ivan at all, I will make sure to place all of his links and any contact information in the show notes below, or if you're on YouTube, the description box below. But without further ado, we'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks, guys. Have a great one.